Horror is one of the most compelling genres of media. It both fascinates and horrifies to see what the worst of humanity has to offer. There's also the beauty of seeing people triumph in their fight to survive what torments them. Whether it be the average slasher villain, an evil spirit, or a personification of their grief, horror is an amazing genre, and I would proudly call it my favorite. But when you love something flawed, it's important to acknowledge the bad that it's done rather than ignore it and pretend it doesn't exist. The horror genre needs to stop using marginalized people as its punching bag. Consider any horror movie you know. There's a great chance that, at least in some capacity, it relies on ableism for its fear factor. Whether it be physical or mental, typically some disability plays a part in the film. If that isn't the case, there's also a likelihood that women or LGBT people are exploited to deliver a subtextual negative message. Horror perpetuates and relies on negative stereotypes to unnerve its audience. Not only does it do that, but it also conditions us to see physically disfigured or disabled people as evil, to be afraid of those we see with these impairments. Here's a clip from one of the most iconic horror films of all time, 1978's Halloween, in which Michael Myers' doctor describes his former patient.
I met this 6-year-old child with this blank, pale, emotionless face and the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes. I spent 8 years trying to reach him, and then another 7 trying to keep him locked up because I realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil.
John Carpenter, director of Halloween, discussed in an interview his inspiration for Michael Myers. While on a college trip to a mental institution he visited, as he says, some of the most serious mentally ill patients. Among them was a young boy with a schizophrenic stare, a really evil stare, directly tying mental illness to being purely and simply evil. Myers is only one of many horror villains whose disabilities are posed as a threat. One modern notable example of just how badly people with disabilities are exploited for scares and horror lies in Ari Aster's Midsummer in 2019. The film features a young boy named Reuben who, throughout the over 2 hour long runtime, appears for only a few seconds. In that time, the camera is trained very directly on the disfigurement of his face. There is no other reason for him to exist as a character except for the audience to feel uneasy or disgusted by its disability. To add to the injustice, the actor for Reuben himself is not physically disabled in any way. Instead, it is only a makeup put on for an act. At the end of the day, these actors can take off their costume and live without prejudice, something that real people with physical and mental disabilities do not have the luxury of doing. Those with disabilities are not the only ones demonized or victimized by horror. LGBT people are often portrayed negatively or misrepresented in the genre. One example is Mark Patton's experience as the lead actor in Nightmare on Elm Street 2: Freddy's Revenge in 1985 caused him immense anguish in his career and personal life. This was vastly due to the gay subtext featured in the film, something the screenwriter David Chaskin blamed Patton for. However, in a later interview, Chaskin admitted he was responsible for the deliberate gay subtext. Mark Patton was not out at the time, but many of the crew suspected he was, and intentionally planned the movie around it. During a time at which the AIDS crisis was rampaging through the gay community, the negative connotation that Freddy's Revenge gives for gay men being punished for not repressing their sexuality is grim and utterly horrendous.
Kind of a siren song for the queer horror community.
Mark Patton's, he's a scream queen.
I wake up in the middle of the first movie that I'm the lead actor in and realize that there's a gay subtext in it.
Some of the circumstances around the making of this film created a lot of hurt for him.
And people ask you about it, you say, no, Mark was just so gay that he ruined the movie.
You know, the mainstream public, they weren't ready for a male scream queen. They couldn't articulate it.
That it wasn't owned as a queer film made a light shine on him that was completely inappropriate.
The film that was poised to launch his career ended up destroying it.
Sleepaway Camp from 1983 is a film focused on a young girl named Angela and her stay at a summer camp. Over the course of the movie, she is harassed, bullied, and physically attacked to the point where she begins to seek out revenge. By the end of the movie, she's piled up quite a body count of her fellow young campers, but suddenly a twist is thrown at us, and we discover that Angela's terrible Aunt Martha had forced Angela to live as a girl, and that she didn't always present that way. The final scene of the movie shows the lead completely naked, staring directly into the camera and releasing an inhuman growl. The moment intends to shock the viewer as a character off screen exclaims, "She's a boy!" The credits roll. The audience is, unintentionally or not, given the connection that Angela killed all those children because she was transgender. Her body is supposed to make us uncomfortable. The core of the problem with everything I discussed previously is the lack of diversity in horror and in media in general. If people with disabilities and congenital illnesses were more properly portrayed, it would be less of a direct attack to have those types of people being depicted as villains. The same goes for any marginalized group. Unfortunately, as of now, we are still stuck in the same cycle of punching down to those who are different from us.